some office hours due to a last-minute curveball that we received as a result of the legislative session. We recognize that the timing of this is unfortunate for a July 15th submission date, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to set aside some time this morning to give you all a tutorial of the workbook and answer any questions you have. We are committed, of course, to supporting you all if you do intend to submit an application here by the 15th, which is quickly approaching next week. As you probably saw in my email, we, of course, are also can be made available for any one-off meetings for your school specifically. So if you want to find some time to meet with myself, Mike Dang, who will introduce himself in a second, we're happy to set aside time between now and next Thursday's submission deadline to answer any questions that are specific to your school. But again, we appreciate you being here. And so again, we're going to provide you with a very brief tutorial of the budget workbook. The changes overall are minimal outside of just a few things that we had to modify due to the change in the funding formula. So here's how we're going to run this meeting today. My colleague Mike Dang is going to provide maybe a 5 to 7 minute overview of the workbook, and he'll share his screen. If you have it in front of you, we'd recommend you pull it up to follow along. If not, you can certainly talk with us afterwards. After that, we're going to then open it up just for questions and answers. So we've found in the past in virtual meetings, as I'm sure some of you have had many virtual meetings the last year and a half, sometimes those questions are most efficiently answered in the chat box. So if you have questions that come up, we'd encourage you to put them in the chat box. But of course, you can unmute yourself and certainly ask a question just over the audio line. And again, we appreciate you being here. If you have all your questions answered, you should certainly feel free to jump off early, but we wanted to hold an hour and a half just for open Q&A because we recognize the timing of this adjustment is a little unfortunate. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you just to speak briefly to the workbook and share your screen. It looks like you're actually sharing both your team screen and your Excel screen. So I think you want to minimize that one window. There you go. And then after that, I think we'll open up to Q&A. And Mike, I'll monitor the chat box for you, and maybe I can read the questions out so you can just focus on the workbook. Mike, I think you're still muted. Did the same thing I did.
Yes. Okay. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mark. And let's see. Appreciate your everyone participating in this. Is this screen, have I enlarged it large enough, or does it need to be enlarged even more? Because we start losing so much visibility of screen size with a larger size. If it needs to be expanded more, let me know. But you also have the model before you, so that should be fine. One thing, let me mention that we did post an updated version on Monday, I think it was, and that's to address something that I'll mention to you, that it wasn't pulling the revenue, the new revenue across into the cash flow sheet. So we did that. So I'll just go over the basic changes. As you know, the payment approach has changed with the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan, SB 543, and there's another cleanup act that they put together this last session. So you'll see in these rows right now here on the enrollment and revenue tab at rows 42 through 47. In row 42, that I don't know if it's going to be applicable to you folks. That is the local special education funding. There's also the state special ed funding, and this is a placeholder right now because we don't know what that amount is. We have asked NDE, the Nevada Department of Education, a few times if they know what it is yet, and they still haven't been able to get to us about that. But you will notice, as you see here, some of the notes that are in the cells that I would encourage you to take a look at. One of the biggest points of this is in the current plan, or before this plan, you could have students in multiple categories, and you will still have students in multiple categories, at least some, and you could get paid on that. Under the new plan, you can only get paid for if one of your students is, let's say, SPED, ELL, and GATE, or at risk. Now you can only get paid for one of those categories. So they're assuming that you'll want to get paid for the student that's in the highest category. So that's an overview on this. But let me dive a little bit deeper on this, and that's that what this logic here is. First, it shows you in the additional funding what the amount is or may be. In this case, it's red, salmon colored, because it hasn't been determined yet what that amount would be. So I did estimate this and put it at 33%, which is lower than what it has been. It works out to be lower than what it has been. It's been in the 3,000 range, and this should work out to about, in Clark County, about $2,700 as an estimator, again, placeholder until we get actual numbers. These are locked down. The ELL, 23% additional funding, the GATE, 12% additional to the base, and then the at risk, formerly known as the free and reduced lunch. And the general students that don't qualify in any of the above categories, just putting in general, and there's no additional funding for them. So it's all base funding for them, or adjusted funding, as you may see. And there are two other categories too, and that's, well, actually, before I get to that, let me mention what you see here. The logic is this would be an estimated overall enrollment. And this could be, let's say you estimate that you're going to have 12% of your students would be SPED students, 13% ELL, let's say 0% GATE, and 70% at risk, and then the other 5%, let's say general. But because you're only going to get paid in one category, you estimate that with duplication, that it may be 5%, that maybe 95%, well, 95% of your students will qualify for this. And in part, that's because when you look at the SPED, because the SPED is estimated to pay the most per pupil of additional funding, you're going to take 100%. So there would be no duplication. So you would take 100% or the full 12% for them. But if they're also an ELL, in this case, maybe you're estimating that 5% are going to be ELL, then it would work out that you would get about 12.4% of your students would be estimated to be ELL that would qualify for that funding. Not that they're not ELL again, but that they would qualify for the funding. Same concept down here. 70% of your students probably at least would qualify for this, but 10% you'd probably be able to count in other categories, higher earning categories. So that would leave you with 63% of your overall population that would be able to get the at-risk funding, which would be the 3% additional. Okay, down here in C51, this is the county in person, it says, or distance ed. So if you're going to be teaching by distance ed, it's a flat rate of $69.80 per pupil across in any of the counties. So that's why there's no breakout for county distance ed, since it's across the state now, it's all the same. So it's either distance ed or it's in person. Right now, they have different numbers, and these are the numbers that we have for these counties. So we've got them, so you can put the whatever that county is that you're going to be teaching students in or applying for, and you'll see the general support in this case, and then you'll start seeing the amounts that they should be able to be getting from this. Let's see. Let me just make a note. And then you'll see that this is pulling off of the calculated number of pupils to get the estimated revenue. And let's see, so you've got the state funding and local funding, but it may not be applicable because the state tried to put all the local and state together, except for that local SPED, which is not applicable to all schools. So you also have, of course, the opportunity to get federal funding, and that's completely separate and additional, and that's in this section here. That would add to your state and local funding, and it's combined down here. And then the DSA sponsorship fee is included here, the 1.25%. I just put a 1% inflator in there, and who knows what that'll be. Some schools have estimated 3%, some have estimated 0%. So you may want to just test that to see. But bottom line is, of course, that you need to be in the black, that you need to operate at a surplus or at least to break even and not at a deficit. So this shows the federal funds, and then this is the total revenue. And then this page has also changed. Let me expand it a little bit more. This is where we can see your planning for year one. Yes.
Mike, sorry, can you just, because your screen is still a little small, which is fine, can you just be sure that you're telling folks who are joining video conference which tab you're on, just so they can follow along?
Oh, great idea. Thank you. Yes, I'm on the CFY1 MO, standing for cash flow year one monthly. And in this one, hopefully you can see now the timestamp across, or the months across here, going across left to right from column F. And then in cell C14, that's pulling the revenue, let's see, from the prior page. And let's see, it says DSA, but I just realized that should be changed to PCFP. But anyway, it's pulling it across. And then on this one, you need to spread your revenues and expenses, the timing on that. If you have, and I need to recalculate it now, but in the prior approach, if you were receiving, if you had about 278 students in Clark County or more, then you could be paid on a monthly basis. But until then, you would be paid on a quarterly basis. So you see, in this case, it's a quarterly payment approach. We just make a note here.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
We had one question come in, and then it might be appropriate just to quickly summarize again the key areas that changed, just at a very high level, maybe 30 seconds, just so people can make sure that they've noted them, because I'm guessing that a lot of the people on the call today have spent significant time in the workbook already. So we had a question from Stephen, who said that the distance ed pull down doesn't seem to populate in the template. Is that something that if he's having trouble with, we should maybe work with him offline or follow up with him?
Yes, let's see, because that should populate. Let's see. Okay, I see. Huh. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's see. Okay, I will fix that afterwards. And if you've already loaded your model, I'm happy to just go ahead and fix it on, email it to me. I'll go ahead and unlock it and then fix it and then send it back to you, so you don't have to reload your data into a new model. Okay, let me go ahead.
So Stephen, it sounds like Michael will get you an updated workbook that fixes it. I think you're the only school contemplating full-time distance ed, so I think that's a one-off situation from what I understand of the other applicants, but we'll follow up with you offline. Thanks, Michael. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, let's see. So going back to the cash flow year one, let's see. That, again, this is where you lay out your monthly plan of how you will be expending your dollars, and then they need to total up. The total in column E needs to match the totals that are brought over elsewhere in column C, and then this column D calculates the variance that's still remaining that needs to be spread out here. So that's the pool of the revenue is the only change here. Otherwise, it stayed the same. And then this revenue section up here for the state spending has changed, other state and local, otherwise the federal stayed the same. And other than that, the rest of the models pretty much the same unless we had some minor cleanup work. So at this point, I'm ready to, we're ready to take any questions, additional questions.
Thank you, Mike. So I'll read the questions out loud so you can keep your screen shared for folks so you can maybe help people out visually. So we had a question from Ro who's asking for federal funding titles 1 through 4, the funding per student populated in the workbook, is that automatically calculated by the state?
Good question. No, it's not. In fact, some of the Title I, it's in yellow unprotected. So you put the estimates that you deem best for you. The numbers that are in here are left over from some schools, and they may be applying in different counties and things like this, or under different circumstances. So you'll want to make sure you check the assumptions that you put in there.
And then there's a follow-up, Mike. Is there a formula we should use for those figures?
You know, we haven't had one at this point. At this point, the schools, we've just let the schools go ahead and research that and find that.
We have another question. This is from Matt. Is the Clark County per pupil funding for 22-23 correct? 7,147. The PCFP tab is hidden, so I'm unable to see. I show 7,293. So I think Matt's looking to verify the Clark County PCFP number and what that might be.
Let me see here. Now, the PCFP here, that what was that number again? You said
it's I think you're just looking to verify for what it is. So he's asking, is it 7,147, or is it 7,293?
Let's see. And actually, let me. Yeah, let me check on that. But yeah, that the PCFP. I'm glad you mentioned that because the PCFP should be correct, and it does factor in the what is it? Was it 99.31? Is that what you were saying, Mark?
Yeah, I mean it's not going to be fully funded. It's just under. That's what the state revenues are estimating for the biennium. So, but I think it shows in the drop down, correct, Mike? I think if you click on Clark County, it gives you a number for all students. Is that right? And I'm showing. I see 7,147 for Clark.
Yes, yes, and that is net of that 0.99. Is that right? 0.9931 that you had mentioned to us before.
Correct. So I think, Matt, the answer to your question is 7,147 is your Clark County number.
Yep, yep. And I'll double check that again afterwards. And if there's any issues with that, I'll let you know. But yes, that should be correct. And in fact, all of these, as I recall, all of these, the counties have that adjuster on them, that 0.9931.
So I see a couple people typing. Please feel free to chat your question to us, and we're able to answer it. Hopefully, the first 20 minutes have been helpful so far. If you want to continue to ask questions, we'll be here until 10 Pacific time. And so keep them coming our way. So we have another question. Can we assume the 3% annual inflation assumption still applies to both revenue and expenses? Mike, I'll let you handle that one, and then we have a different question.
Personally, I would if I were opening a school, I would test it, especially because with the PCFP just being released and with so many changes that have happened, I mean, personally, I would test different assumptions, probably definitely no more than 3%. But I would test, I would also go with even a 0 to see what would happen, to make sure that my school could be in the black, even if it operated, without any inflation in the coming years. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it brings up another thing. You will notice that there's a delay in the revenue, that even if you have students in special populations in year 1, that you don't see payments for them until year 2. And that's the way the legislature set up the new plan right now. We're going to see if we can get, let's say, any changes to that so that you could get paid in the current year. But right now, what they're planning to do is base your payments for these categories on the prior year. So, and in fact, you'll even notice, I think, that the model looks to the prior year to get your payments for that.
Thanks, Mike. And I just wanted to clarify something else that I did not mention at the top. So per my email last week, we not only are having today's session, but we are also offering an extension if people would like up to 1 additional week to submit the workbook only for the application. Again, we recognize that this is an 11th hour change. We think it's cleaner to handle it on the front end. So every other element of an application that's going to be submitted this cycle is due by the 15th, next Thursday. But if you would like a few extra days to submit just the budget workbook, you may email me directly to make that request, and we will happily grant you up to a week extension for that. And again, the reason for that is because we want to allow you time to familiarize yourself with the workbook and make sure that your proposed programming is adequately captured in the workbook. So again, if you want to request that, you may send me an email. I've already had one school request it, and I will probably get a few others. So just reach out to me directly, and we will work it out. Not seeing any questions pop up in the chat box, although I see someone typing. If someone else wants to ask a question via audio, you're welcome to do so.
Hello, this is Rocio Martinez. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can. Go ahead.
Yes.
Hi, thank you. I'm just going to go back real quick to the federal funding, because I've been researching the best figures to use for my Title I through IV funding. Do you guys have any recommendations on where is the best place to kind of see how it all trickles down to the local level? I've been having issues finding school budgets from comparable schools down here in Southern Nevada, so in Clark County. Do you guys have any recommendations for that?
I don't know. Have you downloaded some of the applications from some of our other schools then and looked at those?
I have, yes. So I've been able to, cross-reference and see what they've inputted on there. I think it's just for my own personal knowledge. I kind of wanted to see how it works and how it trickles down. So sure. I figured there probably was a formula, just how we distribute our federal funding down to the local level, but I haven't had much luck in finding that online. So I just wanted to see if you guys had any suggestions.
I'll ask our federal funding people. And I've talked with them before, and at the time they didn't have a lot of clarity themselves on this, but I'll ask them again.
So
okay.
Mike, Mike, just two things. Number one, have you already mentioned when federal funding for first-year schools becomes available?
No, I didn't. Please, you would.
Go ahead, Mike. I'll let you go. And then, Ro, what I would say is, I think we would encourage applicants to make sure that their budget is reflective of the demographics of the community they plan to serve. So hopefully, you can, provide a ballpark estimate of maybe, for example, the number of FRL students that you plan to serve based upon your bottom line. I can't remember if your proposal is contemplating around 300 students, but you can probably take a percentage of the surrounding schools in Clark County to guesstimate roughly how many FRL students you might serve, and then build it out from there. We always kind of encourage people to be a little conservative, but that's where we've seen, I think, applicants have success, the most success. There's not really a tried and true formula, unfortunately. It's really based upon kind of the population and community you plan to serve.
Okay.
Mike, do you want to just quickly touch on the federal funds and when they'll be available?
Yes, and we checked with our federal people on this, and earlier applications we had suggested that the schools might not receive their funding because it's reimbursement based, of course. They might not receive it in the same year, at least for the year one schools. But they're telling us now that they feel comfortable that if the schools are submitting their costs in there, that they can start getting payments later in the first year, as early as later in the first year of a new school. And then I should just add, and then regularly during the school year in the following school years. So that's been an improvement as they've been able to add more staff and add more technology to help them.
Hi, this is Jacob Allen at Pilot Ed. I also sent the same question in the chat. So what it's sounding like is year one special population funding is being paid. It's just the timeline through which it's being paid is moved to year two, but that's not in lieu of year two special population funding as well. You'll essentially just be receiving the majority of it at the tail end of year one. Some of that will trickle into year two along your regular year two special population funding.
That's a really good question. And I've probed on that because I say, well, when you do it that way, it makes it look like a liability. But I'm told, no, it's not a liability of the state. What it is that the state will not count how much to pay you until after you've had a year of actual numbers of students. Then they'll use that as the base to count it, but it's not a liability. So essentially that year one, you're getting paid the amount for the year one in year two, but there's no makeup for the year one.
So Jacob, just to be clear, you'll get your paid for year one students that qualify for the weighted funds in year two. We don't like that system, but unfortunately we don't have a way to fix it. So you should plan accordingly for that. And Mike's mentioning a liability because we've gone back and forth about what happens if a school closes and all of that. But essentially you should plan to get weighted funds for year one and year two.
Alongside those year two weighted funds.
They'll all come a year later. So your year two weighted funds will come
back here. Gotcha. Okay, everything's pushed back here. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mark.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you can hear me. This is Ben Contine. Just to follow up on Jacob's question, and I think you've probably answered it, but it's just, I guess I think important for us to be really, really clear. So that year two, would your funding for special populations would be, we'll just say it's double, I guess, because you're getting essentially paid for year one and year two in the same year, or
So yeah, good question, Ben. So I don't think we hit that head on. I think we were dancing around it. So you will be paid for your special education count in year one, in year two. You will be paid in year three for your special ed count in year two. It's a lag mechanism, okay. Unfortunately. So I wouldn't plan for it to I think you said double. I don't know if that would be my recommendation. I think lag by a year is the way that I would think about it, because it's based on prior year special population enrollment, and that's been done as far back as the state of Nevada has funded special education with a weight or provided additional dollars to that. And again, Mike and I won't take the blame for that because it's a business rule that the department and the Legislative Bureau Council has done. So we're just going to follow that rule. And unfortunately, it's something that we don't have a workaround for at this time. So you should just make sure that it's planned. You're planning for that. And Mike, just really quickly, I believe that you built the workbook in a way to show that that funding would come delayed, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry for hogging the phone line here. This is Jacob again. So the quick question around this: when we are looking at kind of federal mandates around, let's just call special education funding for the topic here. So special education funding, let's for easy numbers say it's $100,000 is what we would get. That $100,000, because it is to be used for special education services for the teacher, for equipment, hardware, so on and so forth, would we be allowed in year one to use other funds to cover that expenditure? Or is it expected that that is to come out of a general per pupil fund because it's technically an already spoken for, or as I would call it in Indiana, coded for special education? Does that make sense?
Yes, makes perfect sense.
So,
Mark, did you want to weigh in on that first?
I'll let you go first, Mike.
Okay, and actually, that's been debated, and my recollection of the debates, in the Pupil-Centered Funding Commission, have been that it should be allowable for the schools to use that for different uses, and that they didn't want to restrict it. So I don't know that anybody ended up tying it down, and I'll double check with Rebecca on this, but when they left it, I thought that they left it that it should be open to schools to use it, especially because they're recognizing that you're going to have students in multiple categories, but they're only going to fund you for one of those categories. I think that was part of the argument, that schools should be able to use it for different categories. Of course, people have mounted the argument that, well, it's for SPED, but and that is certainly one side. But as I recall, again, they left it with an openness. Mark, how about yourself? Do you?
No, I think that's right. I think they recognize the pitfalls of the formula and how a first year school is kind of at a disadvantage. So I think that there's more flexibility there. I'll also note that there's some changes in how coding is now going to be working moving forward for schools in operation. That's not something we're going to talk too much about today because it doesn't really impact your work for an application, but it's something to keep in mind should you be authorized. So Jacob, we can follow up with you and anyone else regarding that specific question, because I think it's an important one, because schools will be expected to cover those expenses even though they won't be paid until a year later.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
This is This is Stephen Narcisse at SL. For someone like us with a statewide distance ed program, grabbing the assumptions for the title, the federal funding and the IDEA funding, I'll just say it wouldn't be county specific. How would you point us to locking down those incremental dollars for a statewide program?
So Stephen, just to be clear, you're talking about for a distance ed school.
Correct.
How would you estimate some of your federal dollars on a per student basis?
Right, for a program that's going to span the entire state. That's right.
So I think you have a number of options. One is to leverage your community outreach efforts that you've conducted so far. So I'm assuming that your application team has done outreach across the state and can basically estimate roughly how many students you might be serving from a county by county, and you have access to their demographic. information. And so I would recommend that based upon your community outreach and engagement with interested parents and families, that you kind of work backwards and say, okay, if I've got, let's say 10 students from Elko County that are potentially interested, what are the demographics of Elko County? And do they have a high number of Title III students? If so, I should probably account for that in some form or fashion in my estimate. I would still be a little conservative just because none of those revenues are guaranteed until we get a count day number established for authorized schools. But I would, like I told Ro earlier, I would look at the community outreach and where it's coming from, and then look at the demographics of those traditional public schools in that area. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, this is Ben Contine again. So just one more thing on the so with the federal funds being sort of allocated a year later, but they're still considered essentially revenue, allotted for that year one. How does that impact the proportion or percentage, the proportion of facilities cost versus your total revenue? Does that revenue count towards, when you're talking about facilities costs, is it a percentage of that total revenue, including those federal funds, or even though you're not getting them that year one?
Mike, I'm going to let you answer that one.
Sure. Now, do you mean for the federal or for the state?
Well, I guess since both are lagged here for year one, right? So both are in a year two lag. Is that correct?
Right. And well, actually, no, our federal team now says that they expect to be able to reimburse you in year one for your federal. But for the state, that is for special populations.
Yes.
That is an NDE thing that they're going to pay you a year later in year two for year one.
Okay, so then I would be talking about the state funds. So do the state funds count in that year one revenue related to facilities costs? Because we're obviously trying to keep our facility the percentage of our budget going to facilities at a pretty fixed number. So does that, what revenue are we using that percentage off of? Are we including those state funds in year one or not?
That's a great question, because when a school is approved, they're required to do annual reports, and in your annual reports, you're going to be required to have two different types of statements in there, your accrual statements and your modified accrual statements. So it's something you'll be getting together with your accountants to go over. I would imagine that the full accrual, that they're going to want you to count it in the year that it's earned. And Michael may have some thoughts on this. He specializes in more of these things, and Michael Hutchins on our team, he's certainly welcome to weigh in if he'd like to.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. For the federal funding in year one, my take is, so especially in light of it now being possible to start getting those funds before the end of the year, if your funding is sure enough that you could get financing based on it, I wouldn't be too concerned whether you're actually getting it before June 30th or after July 1st. If the event that's being reimbursed happens during the school year, if you want to include it for budgeting purposes, as long as you also account for in the cash flow the fact that you're not actually getting it until the end of the year or beginning of the next one.
Okay.
Thank you. Right, because again, when you talk to your accountants, they'll be talking to you about the earned and how the modified accrual system is also a part cash. But as to whether they want to do that with that, but you'll have two statements that you submit to us, or two types of statements later on. But that's certainly down the road. Yeah.
I guess I'll just be what I'm getting at is we. And I know probably this is true of a lot of schools. We have a roll-up model where we're relatively small in terms of pupils year one, and we grow. And so our facilities costs are, that percentage is higher early and gets lower later. And so, I mean, for us, it would be, the budget works better if we use those, if we position those funds year one, obviously. But obviously we want to also just make sure that we're being responsible and following the rules and making sure that we're actually having something that pencils out realistically.
That's a good point, because you probably, I'm sure you noticed on the summary, we do have a section in there that looks at the facility cost as a percentage of revenue.
Right.
And I think we talked about typically I mean, ideally low, but 12%, 15%. And some schools, talk about how they should be able to go up to 20%. And the way you're talking, it sounds like yours might be up in the 20% or greater for at least year one, depending on how you're counting your revenue. So, but at least, okay, we appreciate you letting us know about that.
Yeah.
Mike, and if I can throw this out there to kind of
Sure.
set Ben at ease, when I'm reviewing one of these workbooks, I'm much more concerned with what percentage is going to facilities in year 5 and 6 than I am with year 1. It's kind of expected that years 1 and 2 are going to be disproportionately high. It's when towards the end of the contract, it's still disproportionately high that we have to worry about sustainability.
Right. Well, that does make me feel a lot better, Michael. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
Good questions. We've had a couple people hop off. We've had a couple of other people join us. So welcome everyone for who's on the call. We've been here about 45 minutes and we got another 45 minutes of office hours. So the time is yours. We certainly can take questions. Audio. We are also encouraging people to, message us questions and we can repeat them for everyone on the call and then walk through the changes. But again, appreciate everyone being here. It's open office hours. So if you need to go, you certainly can. Otherwise, just send us your questions or feel free to unmute yourself. We got a question from Stephen. Are there any issues with multiple teachers on the same lines? Mike, do you want to maybe pull up the staff tab and kind of show how those have worked or how we would recommend people utilize that section of the workbook?
Sure. And regarding that question, and my recollection is that we've tried that and it seemed like it was okay. And the way we're calculating benefits, it should be fine. I mean, if you can, it's set up for individuals, but there may be sections where, let's say up in the admin or office staff or things like this, where you may have to duplicate that. So I haven't tried that recently, but you're certainly free to. And you will notice that on this, we did put this section in yellow so that you can go ahead and overwrite it with your own information. So you can use the formulas, but if you want to try doubling up or tripling on a line, that should be fine. And
Mike,
the formula's running. Yes, go ahead,
Mike,
Mark.
Just to be clear, if you did not want to do that, you could just add in rows, correct? Like those are unlocked. Is that right?
Yeah, let me see. Yes, you should be able to, but let's see here.
Can you zoom in a little bit, Mike?
Okay, no, we do have it locked for that. I'm happy to unlock it for that. But the formulas are based on one because you're just putting in the start year. But we did set it up so you could overwrite those formulas. The thing is, if you overwrite them, of course, then you want to make sure that you are adjusting your numbers further down the line let's say you go to 3, and then once you get set up, you go back down to 2, then down to 1. You want to make sure you're adjusting your lines, your figures all the way across.
Stephen, I hope that answered your question, but if it did not, feel free to unmute yourself or okay, good.
And here we see the effect of the doubling, and then the tripling, and then going back down to one principal. So it looks like it's working fine for that.
Good. And again, I want to reiterate for people that may be joining late or missed the first couple minutes, we did not change the entire workbook. We would not do that to anyone. We just made some modifications to address the changes that the legislature adopted around June 1st related to the pupil-centered funding formula. So if you've, again, spent time in the workbook, and I would hope that you have with the submission deadline next week, a lot of this is going to look the same, but we have made a couple of adjustments to account for the weights that Mike is showing on his screen right now, and then adjust for the county and distance ed portions. So again, we hope that these changes, while minor, certainly you can work through them in the next week or so for a successful submission.
Yes, and just a reminder for anybody that's new, this section, this additional funding area shows the additional funding for students that qualify in these categories like ELL, GATE, AR, and special education. The special education is just a guess right now, and it's trying to be a conservative guess because NDE, we're still waiting for the actual numbers for that. This column D here, this is, if you were to look at NDE's numbers or our numbers of the percent of students in special ed, ELL, they might look like this for some of the schools. And then because you're not going to get paid on duplication, you need to try and estimate as well as you can how much duplication there may be. In this case, we're assuming no duplication because you're going to get the most payment for that student. But for the others, there may be duplication that you'll need to adjust for. So you may think that the area, your feeder schools may have 13% ELL, and you may think, okay, we're probably going to get 13%, but 5% of those may be SPED students, so we're going to take out 5%, and that goes ahead and calculates what 95% of the 13% would be, and so on down here. We estimate that 70% of the students will be FRL or at risk, but 10% of them will probably be counted in other areas. So it'll probably work out to about 63% are the number of students we can get paid on that are at-risk students. That's the concept there. And there's no additional funding for for non-special population students. Mark, if you want to, I'm certainly happy to stay on. If you want to jump off, I'll disconnect my camera and then do some work, but I'll leave my Teams line open if you want.
No, I'm going to stay on just because I want to make sure we get all questions. We've got a couple people on here that we have not heard from, which is fine, but I wanted to make sure that if they had any questions, they got them answered. So again, feel free to message or take yourself off mute. We're going to be around again for another 40 minutes, just in case there are questions.
One quick thing, I did send Steven that updated workbook that allows for the distance ed to be selected. If anyone else needs a copy of that, drop your email in the chat and I'll get it sent to you also.
Great, thanks.
Thank
And as I mentioned too, if you already populated yours, feel free to email it to us and we'll make the adjustment and send it back to you.
One other thing that I would just mention, sometimes we have schools that have questions about why a cell's unlocked or not unlocked, or people want to make sure that they have an accurate budget workbook that matches their narrative. If for whatever reason you are seeking to have a specific cell unlocked, or maybe you want to call a teacher something different to match your narrative to make sure that all of your staff is appropriately accounted for in your budget, please reach out to us. Otherwise, you're likely to get a question along those lines after we receive the application. We want to make sure that the budget accurately captures everything that's in your narrative. So do not be a stranger. We always encourage you to send those questions our way so we can help you make sure that comes to fruition. So I see just a handful of people left. We might end the recording at least a few minutes early. Although Mike, I think we should keep the line open just in case someone comes in close to 10 o'clock. But
Sure.
Jinlan, you are the only person on still that is from a prospective applicant. Do you have any questions that we can answer specific to your school while you've got 4 staff members' attention? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Mark. I don't have question yet because the other people already asked my question. And if I have more questions later, I find out, I will ask you or Mike later. Thank you so much. I have learned something that I didn't know before, and I will get. All right. Also, I think we are not ready to submit the application for the summer because our community outreach did not meet our goal. So we're still working on it with the mayor in Sparks. But I think we have to delay our application to the winter session.
Oh, no. Well, I'm glad that we were helpful today. I'm sorry that you don't feel like you may be ready to submit next week, but certainly we always encourage you to put your best foot forward. So sometimes taking kind of a step backwards for 5 to 6 months and reevaluating and continuing engagement can be appropriate. So if you do in fact choose to punt until January, that's fine, and we can certainly be available to you in the fall to answer any questions that come up.
Okay, thank you so much. And also, when should be the time to submit the letter of intent for the winter session?
Good question. So if you are going to look for the winter session, it would be 4 months prior. So that would be by September the 15th. And we usually try to post those links for the letters of intent probably around August. Early August is usually when it goes live on our website, but you would have from then until September 15th.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Danny, I think you can probably stop the recording right now. I will hang on the line with you gentlemen just so we can